Hello and welcome to The Real Bottom Line, the podcast for entrepreneurs featuring entrepreneurs. Today, my very special guest is Jackie Dinsmore, and she wears many hats, one of which is lawyer, one of which is serial entrepreneur, and one also is investor. So, we're going to have a very interesting talk today. So, I'm super excited to have you here, Jackie. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to chat with you.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, we start this podcast a lot of times with trying to understand your journey to entrepreneurship. Were you always an entrepreneur at heart, or is this something that you stumbled into? How did this start for you?
Well, good question. So we were always that family that had garage sales, and my parents had a number of businesses. Like they had a nutritional supplement business on the side, and like my dad was a chartered accountant, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. But I was always kind of observing them doing these small little side businesses, and I used to get so excited about garage sales. Wendy, like I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, we sold that for $10." So I think my dad, in particular, really kind of nurtured the entrepreneur in me. But sadly, when you and I were going to school, they didn't really have
Mm,
entrepreneurship programs. Like it was like math, science, French, history, business, but business didn't talk about entrepreneurship. When you're in business, are you going to be an accountant? Are you going to be, a finance person? Are you going
yeah.
so it was very, very different. Um, so I kind of stumbled into entrepreneurship. I think it was always my calling. And I always wanted to kind of do something to better the world. And so I actually wanted to be a lawyer for the deaf. I thought being a lawyer could like basically get me into kind of business and doing all these kind of fun things, but I also wanted to save the world. So I thought, well, I knew a little bit of sign language. My aunt and uncle were deaf. Why don't I be a lawyer for the deaf and help that community? The other thing that I was thinking of, because I won some awards in family law in law school, was that maybe I could work for like the Children's Aid Society. But all of that is also very emotional. So that was kind of tough. So fast forward, when you're in law school, the big law firms come to do these kind of, little lunches and dinners, and they try and find out which students would be good for their summer student program. And I was very fortunate to be selected for a summer student program in a big firm. And my dad at the time said, "You don't turn that down." I'm like, "But I'm supposed to save the world." "No, you don't turn that down. That's amazing for your resume. You don't do that." Right. So I ended up on Bay Street being a corporate lawyer, billing tons of hours, doing all that kind of thing. And I had to kind of put my desire to be an entrepreneur, that nagging kind of feeling that I should be an entrepreneur, aside for a few years.
How close is Bay Street lawyering to Suits? Is there any overlap whatsoever?
Well, the thing that frustrates me with Suits, and it probably frustrates every lawyer out there, is you can't practice family law one day and then criminal law the next day and corporate law the next day and la la la. And I don't think there's as much drama amongst all of the characters and players, although there is that. The rumor is that Suits was partially filmed in my old firm, so I do feel a little bit, because it's filmed in Toronto, so I do feel a little bit like there's some elements,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So, but now as a lawyer, you also ended up starting a business. Now, it was with your mother. Did you start with your mother right away, or did you kind of, you know, reel her in at some point? Like, how did that have come about?
Yeah, so quite the opposite. She reeled me in. So there I am sitting, at my desk till 3 in the morning. Like that's just the nature of Bay Street work. And sometimes I call them God winks, or, TSN turning points, or whatever you want to call them. My mom ended up getting stage 3 breast cancer. She survived it, but at the time, we have no idea, right? Like stage 3 is pretty progressive. And I thought, you know what, this is kind of a moment in time where I need to really reevaluate what I'm doing. And a job came up at the Toronto Star 4 days a week, which was unheard of in our profession. It's very, very rare that you can work part time. A number of people applied for it. I was really lucky to get the job. The general counsel and I hit it off talking about our dogs. So I went over to the Toronto Star and worked in house there. It's actually Tour Star, and they own a number of newspapers. And a little bit into that career, my mom had survived breast cancer, and she said, "I have an amazing idea for a handbag. I was going on a cruise and I put 6 handbags in my suitcase, and that's not feasible because I don't have enough room for them. So I came up with this convertible handbag idea, and I think you should do it with me." And at the time, I was on maternity leave, and somehow a lot of people think, "Oh, well, that's your break," right? But shockingly, we started this handbag company while I was on maternity leave. And that was my first venture into entrepreneurship. By the time I came back from maternity leave and maybe a little bit of time after that, uh, next thing you know, we're in 250 stores. We're in the Oscar swag bags. We're in the Emmy swag bags, and a lot of fun stuff happened. And that was kind of the first instinct I had that entrepreneurship was going to be my new path.
What was your biggest lesson thing that you learned in the handbag industry? Because it is different. It's retail. You couldn't ask for something that's more different from selling your time as a service.
Yeah, and you know what? I would never do it again. Handbags are very brand centric, right?
Mm,
So you're competing against the Kate Spades and the Louis Vuittons and all these really big brands who have huge, deep pockets.
yeah.
The other thing is, if you're going for that kind of everyday handbag, which is what we were doing, because our concept was it was like a black handbag, and then you can put these kind of reversible slip covers on them and change the look. Well, that black handbag better stand up,
Right.
and so just handles, and people are really rough on their handbags. So quality issues left, right, and center. It was really, really hard, to manage that, and just the amount of money we needed to put into it. So we ended up actually pivoting from that business.
Hmm.
By this point, my kids were a little bit older. My son would not wear a sun hat for, like, those toddlers, you throw the sun hat on and they do the straight back and they just throw the sun hat off. So I had actually gone to a parenting class and they said, don't ask your child to wear the jacket. Say, would you like to wear the red jacket or the blue jacket? Empower them with choice. So I went to my mom and I said, this handbag idea we have would translate really well into the kids' clothing market, because now we're not worried. You worry about quality and you worry about it being cute, but people that are buyers of kids' clothes aren't as brand centric.
Mm,
If it's cute and good quality, it's great. And kids grow out of it. So you don't have to ensure that this hat's going to survive 25 years of use. So Flapjack Kids was born, and we created a line of all reversible kids clothing, mostly sun hats and beach cover-ups and things that were easy to reverse. And next thing you knew, we were in 5,000 stores, more than 10 countries. Like it really took
were
off.
you doing this gig full time and lawyering, or did you take a step back from law at that point?
I left law in 2010, so there was a time where I was doing both, and taking that leap of faith was hard. You have to have a really supportive spouse, and I did. So I was really happy about that, because he was kind of the stable corporate guy,
Yep.
and I was a crazy entrepreneur over here. But it was tough, right? Like, the problem with retail is, we would sell to a lot of boutiques, we would sell to big retailers, but they lean on you for capital. You basically have to buy all of the inventory, have it sitting there, being able to ship it within 1 to 2 weeks. So you're sitting on a lot of money in a warehouse.
Yeah.
Highly intensive capital business, unlike professional services where it's just different. You don't have to maintain inventory in the same way.
That's fascinating. So, um, you had an exit from that business. You know, was that solicited? Did you decide it was time? Like, how did that all come about, in terms of that exit?
Yeah, no, good question. Another God wink, truly another God wink, because we sold in March of 2019, and we all know what happened in 2020.
Oh my goodness.
And we weren't really looking. The individual who bought us is terrific and continues the business to get today. And I'm always on the website making sure, oh, what's it doing now? Lots of new designs and styles, and he's made it his own. But he owned one of the factories that produced for us, and he just saw the volume we were doing, and he's bought up a number of brands and has a really terrific back office and has done really, really well with the brand. And so, I mean, that's the thing with consumer brands too, is that if you don't have really deep pockets and you're not willing to basically give up a lot of equity or
Mm,
go down the significant debt avenue, you need to find somebody who can have that back office and that overhead, and run it more effectively and efficiently than you can, and have money to really invest in inventory. And he was that guy.
it feels like, we have this fallacy that, oh my God, I have all these sales. And then we see this company go into business because it's all cash flow, right? And you're talking a lot about the cash flow piece of being aware that a sale sometimes requires capital from you before you get the money in.
Yeah. Yeah.
What were your typical terms like?
Oh, well, the big guys were the worst, right? And so a lot of times what I'll tell people is we were a summer product, right?
Mm,
And so a lot of the stores wanted our product in their stores or in their warehouse for February
yeah.
so that they had it in place for March break, right? So working backwards, that means that they would put their order in August.
Hmm.
We would have to pay 30% down,
Yeah.
and then the factory would work on it September, October, November, or whatever. And then when it shipped, we would pay 70%. So now we've paid 100%.
Yeah.
And hopefully there aren't any delays in shipping, because especially when you're working with China, you have to work with Chinese New Year as well,
Okay.
right? So New Year is particularly tough in the sense of they're closed for usually the month of February. So you got to make sure your shipment gets out before then, or else you have to wait a month. And if you're like a minute late or 5 minutes late, a lot of these companies will cancel their order. So if it gets here for January, then they get it in their stores for like their warehouses for February, get it in the stores for March, and then they have 60 to 90 to 120-day terms on top of that. So now you're at April, May, June, July. So you have paid for it all by about October, November ish, and you're not getting paid till July.
I just threw up a little in my mouth when you described all that. That this is not for the lighthearted, the retail business. The other thing I find fascinating about the retail business is just how far in advance your promotions and everything else has to be planned out. Like Valentine's Day has to happen in October or whatever. Like, were you guys doing more of a push pull? Like, who was doing the marketing? You guys as well, or just the retailer who bought your product? Like,
Mostly the retailer, and we had distributors as well, but you're always working like basically 6 months to a year in advance, right? So when it's summer, you're working on winter products. When it's winter, you're working on summer products. And at least kids stuff, lions and monkeys and frogs and bears don't really go out of style. Handbags are a little tougher, right? Because the styles can change so quickly. You're working on something a year in advance, but who knows if that will change? And all of a sudden, you thought that red was the color of the season. You've just invested in thousands of red handbags, and guess what? No, red's not the color anymore.
it is
So,
orange. Or yeah, it's true. Like you almost have to be like such a predictor of the future of
yeah.
uh your requirements and the colors and the design, like so many elements. That's interesting. So do you miss that business at all?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, my really good friend Kelsey Ramsden wrote a book called The Success Hangover,
Mhm.
and I talk about this a lot. And I know that like sometimes there's all these little violins out there, like, "Oh, you sold your business. How sorry do we feel for you?" But my mom in particular, she was like close to 70 or around 70 when we sold. And she knew that she wasn't starting a new business
Yeah.
after this. She knew that this was kind of like the
Yeah.
end. And I think she in particular had a hard time with it. She was used to going into the office and seeing the employees and
Mm,
being a part of something. And what I've told a lot of people is that it's not the size of the check, or it's not the check for a lot of
yeah.
people, right? It's about the sense of purpose. And there really is such thing as a success hangover, that once your baby's gone, like what does the next chapter look like? And I think that's hard for a lot of owners that have exited.
Well, the statistics around that of owners regretting selling is in the 76% range in the year. And I think that's because, to your mom's point, she had an ecosystem of friends and community and camaraderie that wasn't anywhere else at that
Yeah.
level. So then if you haven't built that outside of the workplace, I think there's that sense of loss that's even more because of
Yeah.
it's the human connection that they miss too.
And we realized every dinner conversation was about the business. Every lunch conversation was about the business. And so after we sold it, we talked about it a little bit. But then as time has gone on, we don't talk about the business anymore, right? And so our conversations, the nature of our conversations have changed. So it's something to kind of be wary of. And I think the Rolling Stone gathers no moss, and I think you should always be doing different things. My mom's taken up painting since and is taking on some other hobbies. But and then I had another business that I was able to go to. So.
Oh, that's amazing. Now, you went back into law and had another exit, which is, when I talk to lawyers and about their firms and stuff, because, helping people with their value of their business, they don't perceive that there's a market for a law firm. So, how did that journey start? What happened there?
Sure, sure. And I actually have had two exits of professional services. I'm not going to go into the dribs and drabs of it because it's a little complicated, but I was really frustrated with lawyers. So when you're in house at the Toronto Star or Tor Star or any company, you are actually a consumer of legal services. People don't necessarily realize
Mm,
that. You actually hire external counsel,
yeah.
and because you're not expected to do it all yourself in house. You try and do as much of it as you can in house, but not expected to do all of it in house. And so I would hire external firms, and I got really frustrated with them. You know, four lawyers on a phone call, lawyers not calling me back. I once had a lawyer pick a very expensive steakhouse for us to go to for lunch, and not only did he make us pay for the lunch, but he made us pay for his time during the lunch. Like, I just think customer service in the legal profession has gotten so bad over the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And clients put up with it because it's like when you have a bad doctor, what are you going to do, right? Like, you need them. And I was just fed up, and I approached my two colleagues who had started a firm called Cognition that was really out there to really disrupt the industry, make it better for entrepreneurs, make it better for lawyers, do all the things that you were supposed to doing from day one. And I was so impressed with them. I convinced them to let me buy in. I said, I think you guys need some estrogen. It took a little bit of convincing and a few years,
You wore
but
them
we were
down.
but we really, like, kudos to them because we really were onto something, and I think our success to date has proven that.
Mm.
It's I think people were thirsty for change in the legal profession, and I'm really excited to kind of to see what more we can even do.
So what did you change? What it was status quo and how did you disrupt? Because I do
Sure.
believe too, legal, accounting, there's a whole bunch of places that are ripe for disruption.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, well, it starts with the people. I believe that any professional services firm is only as good as your people because that's what you're selling, right? And so we are really picky about the lawyers we bring on board. We hire about one and bring on about 1 in 36. So 35 lawyers that we reject go elsewhere. And the thinking behind it is we want folks that have that Bay Street or that big firm training because that's really where you train to be a fantastic lawyer. Like, their training is second to none. Ideally, not always, but ideally. And then the second, and I'd say the most important factor, is that they have in-house experience. So they've either worked in a business, had their own business,
Mm.
like they've been in the
They sat
trenches
on the
with.
other side of the table, so to speak.
Exactly. So you're more practical, you're more business minded. You can't be the sales prevention team. You can't write 25-page memos on an issue because from an academic perspective, it's interesting. Your client wants to know, can they do this or can they not do this in 3 sentences or less? And so we really drive home that you need to be more practical and business minded with your clients. And so that's the one way. The second way is we don't have the mahogany panel boardrooms and the fancy artwork and no one cares about that stuff anymore. Where you golf. If I turned to a client and said, okay, you have to pay $1,200 an hour, but you get to eat dinner at the fanciest restaurants in Toronto and go golfing at the nicest golf courses, or you pay $395 an hour and you eat at Swiss Chalet, what would you
Be
choose?
wherever you want. Yeah, exactly.
I think 99% of people will choose the second because they don't care about all that stuff anymore. It's not about who your best buddy was at some big firm. It's about where do you get the most practical business minded advice for a cost that's reasonable. Are we the cheapest? I don't want to be a race to the bottom.
No.
My view is it's like when you hire a contractor. You might not hire the most expensive contractor to help with your house. You're not going to hire the cheapest. But what about somebody that's kind of here in terms of cost, but the value is incredible? And so that's what we really tried to do. And then I think the last way we disrupted is technology.
Oh.
A lot of firms are so scared of technology in the legal industry.
Mm.
And they've always been. I remember there was a lawyer that I worked with who didn't believe in email, didn't want to use email, and he dictate what he wanted to say in an email, and his assistant would type the email and send it out. And I don't know if there's any many more of those guys left, but there, for whatever reason, legal industry has been terrified of technology, and as a firm, we decided to embrace it. So our clients don't have that minute book with the gold plaque sitting on their shelf, right? Like how archaic is that? Why is that not digitized? And why was that not digitized 10 years ago? We have, systems where all of our clients' contracts can be in one place. And so we had one client who had 1,000 leases, and they wanted to know when certain leases expired and when certain leases need to be renewed. Why can that not all be found out at a touch of a button? Why are you going through bankers'
Yeah.
boxes to try and find that out? So we embrace AI, we embrace technology, and we think it's here as a partner, not as a hindrance.
I love that attitude, and I see. I feel like the pandemic helped a lot of industries become a little more tech forward because they were forced to, or they couldn't
Mhm.
do business anymore, right? Like, I even just think of my industry selling an insurance policy, and I couldn't use DocuSign pre-pandemic; it would get
Right,
rejected. And then afterwards, 3 months in, we're all of us can do it now. So you know,
right.
sometimes
No,
we
exactly.
need that trauma in the ecosystem, I guess, to force change.
Yeah, and I say, the pandemic was horrible for so many
Yes.
people. If there was one good thing that came out of it, is that it taught us how to work remotely. And our firm has always been remote. So as much as us trying to make sure the clients are happy, we wanted to make sure the lawyers are happy. So we gave them that flexibility to work remotely. And in doing so, we saved the overhead of a big
Yeah.
lease, right? Like, so we have a small office and they've worked remotely or they work at the client. So now the rest of the world is starting to embrace that, although I am hearing that a lot of employers want their employees
People back.
back.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's because of the big empty spaces to some degree.
right, exactly. So I have a solution. Don't have that big empty space to begin with, and,
There you go.
and there.
I'd love a question. Here's where I want to go next is because you've obviously been on one side of a sale and you've probably been on the other side too as legal for maybe a buyer versus being the seller. What do you find are the biggest mistakes that a buyer makes and that a seller makes, or that you've seen happen that people should be aware of? Hey, don't do that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's start with the seller, and we talked about this. We've talked about this previously. When folks don't have their business and their ducks in a row,
Mm,
I always say it's like selling your house with clothes all over the floor, right? So you want to sell, a potential buyer comes along and they say, "We'd like to see your minute books." Oh, we haven't looked
what
at
are
those.
those?
What are those? We've got that. We don't have one. Or we haven't looked at ours in 10, 15 years, and you gotta like blow the dust off when you take it off the
Yeah,
shelf. How bad does that look, right?
yeah,
Because immediately the buyer is going to say, okay, well, okay, so it's just a minute book, but what else in their business hasn't been taken care of, right?
yeah.
So I always give advice that if you're going to sell your business, or even if you think maybe you won't sell your business, but even if you're thinking about it, just always have your house clean because you never know when the guests are going to drop by,
Well, to your
right?
point, you had two unsolicited offers for two different businesses, meaning
Right,
that you hadn't gone to market, but
right.
you were ready.
You have to be ready. You absolutely 100% have to be ready. And then on the buyer side, I see a lot of buyers, who have rolled up different industries, which I think really
Mm,
is
yeah,
interesting, right?
yeah,
Kind of happened with Flapjack Kids in the sense that he saw these really amazing brands that had a lot in common, and then he had kind of one back office.
yeah,
And I think that's really interesting and a really great strategic
yeah.
approach. If you can buy kind of the right businesses, but all kind of in the same sector,
Hmm.
and in particular if it's a sector and industry that you're knowledgeable
Yeah,
about, I think that's a really great buying approach. And of course, buyers beware. So check the minute book, do your due diligence, take your time, make sure that the person has a really good data room set up and go through it. And so I haven't been a buyer per se. I've never bought a company 100%, but I have been an investor. So
right.
I do walk in their shoes and think about that quite a bit and I guess the other thing too, as an investor, there's nothing that bothers me worse than when I've invested in a company I never hear from
Yeah,
again, right?
yeah,
I want like quarterly updates. I want to just be kept in the loop. Like, how are things going? Like, are things totally tanking? Are they really great? And it's okay if they're not going
yeah.
well. Like, rather hear that now than a year or 2 years from now saying that they went bust and maybe I could have helped along the way.
Right. If we could go back for a second, I think the concept of a data room may not be 100% familiar for most all the listeners. And if you could talk about what is a data room, what is its function, and how is it used?
Sure. And I'm not even going to go into like all the things that could be in a data room.
That's
If
a
any of your
checklist that you need to go get. Yeah.
yeah, any of your listeners ever wanted, we have checklists out the yin yang,
Yeah.
and there's short and longer ones, and yeah. So basically, it's all done electronic now. In the old days, a data room would be literally a room with a whole bunch of bankers boxes. And I remember as articling students, I'd go in and we'd have to kind of sort through all the bankers boxes. Ideally, you have all of your documents digitized and you put it in a Dropbox folder or whatever. There's actually data room companies
Yeah.
that specifically do this. And it's everything from soup to nuts, from like your certificate of incorporation from the moment your business started on day one to all of your supplier contracts and commercial agreements and obviously all of the share documents. Just everything in one place that really it's kind of opening up your kimono. Again, back to the house analogy, if you're going to show your house, think that someone's going to walk in every room and probably open closet doors, right? Bigger
And maybe
closet.
even
What's
lift up the towel, see what's
right?
underneath.
And so that's the way you have to approach it with your business is kind of have everything there. Obviously, I tell clients to make sure they've got an NDA and whatever. What's hard for people is when you're selling to a competitor
Yeah.
because you hear
Yeah.
stories of pretending that they want to buy and then like looking under the hood and figuring out exactly how everything works and then going and using that information. And then it's pretty hard to sue,
It
right?
is, isn't it? Yeah.
But yeah.
What kind of sniff test can you put on that? Like, do you ask for a deposit? Like, what do you do to how can you validate intentions?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it is hard, right? And like I know some of my M&A experts have got some really really good strategies around that. So I'll leave that to them. But a lot of it comes down to knowing who you're dealing with and doing your research on do you trust this person and can you trust this person and are there other people that know that person? So the nice thing about the Canadian ecosystem is and LinkedIn. Thank God for LinkedIn because 20 years ago, you know nothing about this
Yeah.
person and do a Google search and figure out if they're legit and what other businesses maybe they've invested in and whether they're really doing it for the right reasons. I mean, it's like anything, right? You can always still get in a little bit of trouble and end up finding yourself in a bad position. But I feel like if you've done the research, that'll give you one step ahead.
Um, I have this theory that sometimes as entrepreneurs, we want the perhaps lowest cost solution, or we may end up going to see, oh, our real estate lawyer or the guy who helped incorporate me or what have you. So my question is two pronged. I don't think you're allowed to ask three pronged questions, but I'm going to do a two prong. Okay. So my first prong question is, when should I call the lawyer? And what am I looking for in the lawyer's pedigree or experience to tell me that they are the right one for my team?
Sure. So we have been called too early and we've been called too late.
Yeah.
Um, Too early is when you don't even have like you don't really even know if you want to sell the business and you just are
No
kind of
idea.
a whole bunch of questions. When there's maybe a potential buyer in sight, I like it when they've kind of ironed out some of the business terms. I think some folks think that lawyers are going to do that for you.
Mm,
There's been times in my practice years and years ago where I've had someone come to me and say, "Hey, I've been offered $1 million. Do you think that's a good price?" I'm like, I have no idea if that's a good price. Lawyers don't know that,
at
right?
all. Yeah.
Lawyers might be able to say, "Oh, well, I know a similar business that sold for that," but that's not their area of
Yeah.
expertise, right? And I know a fabulous guy who helps value companies and things like that, but that's not where lawyers kind of come in. I think personally, a good time to bring on a lawyer is when you've kind of ironed out some of the business terms. Maybe you have a buyer in mind, and you're just kind of now like trying to put an LOI together.
Which
And a
is,
lot of
which is,
letter of
thank
intent,
you.
sorry. A lot of people will come to us after the letter of intent is signed, and even if it's non-binding,
It's
the
harder.
the, the horse is a bit out of the barn at that point
Anchors have
because
been set.
yeah, it's pretty hard to go back and say, well, we didn't mean this and we should have done this. So definitely before the LOI time signing. And then in terms of the type of lawyer, you hit the nail on the head, Wendy. Like it always frustrates me when people think that all lawyers are created equal. Like, would you go to a brain surgeon if you had a heart attack? Would you go to an electrician if you needed your plumbing done? All lawyers are like, lawyers are different. And so don't go to your wills and estates lawyer to do your M&A work. And lawyers are guilty of this too.
Yeah.
There are some sole practitioners who will take on that work and they shouldn't.
Yeah.
They shouldn't dabble in it because they're doing their client a disservice,
Yep.
right? And it can get really frustrated when I hear that there's a lawyer on the other side who has done wills and estates for 95% of their career and says, "Oh, I'll take on an M&A," because either they're going to make mistakes
Yep.
or they're going to just cause way more work to be done by both sides, and the deal will close way later than it should.
And
So,
cost you more in the end anyway, because
caution in the end, and so find somebody that really they've done this. Ask them for their deal sheet. Ask them what deals they've done.
okay,
They don't client name, but they can say these are the values of the deals
here's
that
the
I've
tech,
done.
here's the industries I did, here's the value. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, and ask around, and it's not always the lowest price. Like don't like it's like getting a hot contractor for a house. Ask around, get maybe 3 quotes, get 3 referrals,
Yeah,
3 suggestions. Consider Caravel, why not, right? But
as well.
shameless plug, but yeah, I think that's the best way to approach that.
I do like that. We've had a pretty wide ranging discussion here today. Is
Yeah,
there a nugget of wisdom that I haven't managed to pull out of you yet that you think entrepreneur you'd like to share with our entrepreneurial listeners?
sure. So a few things. So, what does success look like? A lot of people think it's that rocket ship. It's a bowl of spaghetti.
Yeah,
It's a bowl of, right? And I've seen so many entrepreneurs quit like when they're probably a kilometer away from the finish line, and the like. So just keep pushing. I mean, obviously, no one wants to get to a point where they're basically selling their house and all their assets to make payroll, but you know keep pushing because sometimes you're way closer than you think, and entrepreneurship is not pretty. It is a bowl of spaghetti. I would say surround yourself with people who do things better than you. That's how Bill Gates got to be successful. He's a smart guy,
yep.
but he surrounded himself with people who had strengths that he didn't have. And I think some entrepreneurs are pretty egotistical. And I think at some point you have to recognize that, like, if you just keep working on your weaknesses, it's just a really strong weakness. So surround yourself with people who do things better than you. And then I think the last thing is, and this is more kind of with flapjack kids, as some entrepreneurs are perfectionists, some aren't. If you're a perfectionist entrepreneur, just fight that and go to market and fix later,
Yeah,
because I've seen way too many entrepreneurs just try and perfect their product or their service or whatever, and then they miss the boat because someone else has gotten ahead of them.
yeah.
So just get it out there, as painful as that feels, and get customer and client feedback, and fix,
I,
like, build the plan, applying it.
I love that. I always think of Seth Godin, who says, if you're not embarrassed by the thing you shipped first, you shipped too late.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
isn't
steal
it
that.
great?
Yeah,
Jackie, how do people get a hold of you?
sure.
And I don't usually ask this, but what are the top 3 areas of law that you would be able to help steer people with, whether it's you
Um,
or to your
that's,
team?
that's a hard question. It's easier to say what we don't
Okay,
do
do that
because we
way.
have
Go do that way.
105
Yep.
lawyers, and we help in all areas of a business.
Okay.
So it can be employment, technology, M&A, anything that a business experiences other than tax or bankruptcy.
Okay.
So that's pretty much it. So we don't do family, we don't do like residential real estate, we don't do criminal.
Yeah.
Too much stress. And yeah, and a caravel, just so you know, is a small ship that navigates waters that big ships don't navigate. It's one of those ships with all the sails on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of people don't realize that's what we are, and so it's kind of a knock, not a knock at the big firms, but just that we're very nimble and very entrepreneurial. So yeah, www.caravellaw.com. My email is jdinsmore@caravellaw.com.
Oh my
So
God. Yeah.
that's it.
Thank you so much, Jackie. We'll make sure that information is also in the show notes. I think the real
Amazing.
bottom line here is hire the level of professional you need when you are doing transactions, because it will save you money and heartache in the long run.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Wendy. Take care.